Good morning, dearest friends. It is Thursday, and I want to thank you for taking time out of your day to join us for our study, our journey through the entire Talmud, one page, one line, two letters at a time. Today is Thursday, Nisan 6, April 7th, and we are that Thursday of the month where we're simultaneously, there is a shiur for the women, Rosh Chodesh Society, and we are doing the Gemara shiur. Thank you all for being here, and I want to dedicate today's learning for the well-being of all of Klal Yisrael, particularly the members of our Chabura and their households, which only have good health, good circumstances, and truly all of the brachas that we need for those. And there's no question that Hashem sees Jews who make an effort to study Torah and Jews who make an effort to encourage Torah study, and they're worthy of all of Hashem's unlimited bracha. And so we'll dedicate our learning for them. I want to mention Nachum ben Parla, Leah bas Rita, Malka bas Rivka, and just one other name, I'm sorry, that I want to mention, and then we'll get started. Where'd it go? I might have to give up. Hold on one second. Tamara Bas Devoira for a speedy, successful procedure. So we're talking about knots. Tying on Shabbos is a non-Shabbos, an un-Shabbos dike activity. We don't tie. Of course, there are exceptions. There are always exceptions because not every tie, or not every knot, I should say, is created equal. And so we've been exploring the Mishnah and then in the Gemara, the types of knots that are prohibited, the types of knots that are permitted, the types of knots that are complicated. And of course, we're tying ourselves into knots to figure this all out. And so we spoke about shoes, and apparently there are a lot of knots employed in the shoemaking process. From that, we segued into a discussion about the status of a keli. If a broken shoe or broken sandal is still considered a vessel, is there a utility? And if there was some varying opinions about how broken a shoe must be, and that we projected or applied to the discussion of purity and impurity, which led us to a question about what happens if it breaks on one side and then the other side, which we then talked about a keli, a vessel that has a bunch of little small punctures, which are each patched up, turning to the size of a pomegranate. And of course, the Gemara said that although the vessel is now susceptible to ritual impurity, but it is not an old vessel, it's a new vessel. And we brought my poor muscle of a car, which first exchanged the motor and then exchanged everything else. And at a certain point, it's an entirely new car. I know sometimes we imagine humanity that one day will be able to, what do we call it, bionic, so the question is, at what point are you a new barrier, a new person? Not for now, but
depends what percent of Botox there's in the body.
So, I mean, look, Baruch Hashem, today it brings to mind the wondrous medical advances of the ability to have a transplant, and the amount of lives that have been saved and improved with that technology. But anyways, back to our Gemara. So we closed that off. We talked about great praise heaped upon Rabbi Yochanan. He's superhuman, angelic, and then we talked about the nature of society and people to always yearn or look at the previous generations fondly and with admiration. And we challenge our ability to ever reach the caliber of the people past. And of course, we could debate, although we'll probably want to jump into the Gemara, if there is truly a difference between us and the previous generations, or just we don't observe, or it's hard for us to notice when we fill the shoes of those in the times past, because it's gradual. And we also know every person knows their own flaws and weaknesses, and that of their contemporaries much better than we know. And we don't know necessarily people of times past weaknesses, certainly at times past where society didn't share a lot. And so it's natural that we only know the strengths of times past. So it's a good debate, a good question if we can ever fully fill the shoes, but it is expressed beautifully and poetically in that expression. We're now going to go back to the Mishnah, or the analysis of the Mishnah, talking about other scenarios where the knots are permitted on Shabbos, because we presume that it's going to be done and undone on the very day, as well as because it has essential utility. And the Gemara, as we've been doing until now, is going to ask, is it not obvious? Then the Gemara is going to explain why there is a chiddush involved, or in different words, the Gemara is going to explain why there is danger, why the knot has the potential to be problematic, and therefore the chiddush of our Mishnah is that one may yet tie and untie the knots. So I'm giving you a general template that we're going to be applying to a few upcoming questions or issues, types of knots. I'm going to share the screen. And once again, thank you all for being along for the ride. And just to note, the Zoom will be knocking us off. And whenever they do, that'll indicate that we've come to a complete stop and we've reached our final destination for today. Here is the Mishnah. Thumbs up. You can see the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, shkoyach. Here we go. Our Mishnah indicates that one may tie the spout, this opening of a flask, of a skin that transports or carries wine and oil. So the Gemara says, Pshita, of course, one is going to be permitted to open. Oh, I didn't say which page we're on. We're chapter 15, 112b. I hope the folks in the future will have the patience to wait to this point so they know where we are in the Gemara. So the Gemara says, is it not obvious that one would be permitted to open the knot for wine and oil? Because these are the type of knots that are frequently done and undone. Therefore, it is not a permanent kasher shel kayama. And so, of course, one should be permitted to open it. What's the chiddush? If the Mishnah wouldn't have mentioned that, we would already presume that you're allowed to do so. You're allowed to open and close your wine. Now, again, today, Baruch Hashem, most of our drinks and beverages come in containers with a cap that we twist on and off, and there's no malacha involved. And even though, well, yeah, there's no malacha to open and close a cap, or many of our drinks and milk. Yeah, in Eretz Yisrael, Mark has a little bit of a different arrangement with his milk. I understand, right? You still get milk in the bags? Your Mark, you're muted.
Yeah. No, we don't drink milk, so I don't. I know it used to be in bags. I remember seeing it.
So in Israel, if you want to have a milk or a
I think they have in
chocolate
cartons now too.
milk, which I think is a lot more popular in Israel than, I may be wrong. But anyway, so there you actually have bags. And if you open the bag and you want to close it, you might have to try to tie a knot to keep it closed. And, if you're an American or a chutznik or an Ola Chadash, you might struggle to figure out how to balance that bag in those pitchers so that the milk doesn't spill all over or doesn't have to be
Yeah,
thrown out.
they have special things to hold the bag.
All right, special kind of pitcher. But anyways, my point is today we don't use knots very much in closing up drinks, but not far past, and they didn't have plastic either in the Mishnah. But anyways, the point is wine and oil, you got to close it up. You might tie a knot, keep it shut, and then you'll untie it when you want to have more wine or more oil. So the Gemara says there is a chiddush. Lo tzricha. The Mishnah needs to explicitly specify that a flask or a wine pouch can be opened, tied, and untied, because the islay tarte oine. The wine has two ears. Rabbi Steinsaltz says two spouts, so you could pour it out of both sides. So I'm imagining, and maybe I'm wrong, but imagine a bag or a sack that's open along the top, so you can pour out of either side, and then you can maybe tie both, or maybe it's two separate
Remember,
spouts.
to pour out of something like that, you need the other one to let the air in. Otherwise, it won't go out.
It won't come out in an ideal manner.
Yeah.
Right? I know, Mark, you're the engineer, so I'm not going to argue on the physics of this, but I think you could in a very messy kind of way. So I think, Mark, I think you're right though. We're describing maybe two separate spouts on each corner, let's say, to simplify things. So maybe you'll think that although, as Mark points out, you really want to have both sides open to let the air in, allows it to come out, however that works. But maybe you're going to only untie one and you can kind of force it out. It's not going to be great. It'll make a little mess. Kamash Malah, and therefore the halacha teaches us that one is permitted to tie and untie. Rashi, Tarti Uni. It's two spouts. You fold them in, you tie them up, and maybe you'll use only one and not the other. Rashi Mao Detema Mevatale. Likesher Shalpia. Maybe you're going to leave the knot. And maybe you'll take it out from the other one or another way. Kamash Malah, and therefore the Mishnah teaches us that generally speaking, or not generally, you're allowed to tie and untie the item, even though there is a heichatimsa, there is a way that one might leave it shut, but typically that's not what's done. and therefore one is allowed to tie and untie for the purpose of serving themselves these drinks, as is listed in the Mishnah.
Rabbi,
Yes.
can we generalize this to all food packaging that we could therefore open on Shabbos?
So there is a lot of latitude for opening food packaging on Shabbos, but I'm not certain if this gives us enough. I don't know if this is the origin for much of that discussion. Here is a specific discussion about nuts. So it's an important point you made. I was wondering who was going to make it. But this is not necessarily the primary source that provides that information, because here we're talking, I think, more about the common nature of how people used these flasks or bags, and so therefore the Mishnah understands and the Gemara affirms that it is common to untie both, and therefore we don't look at it as a permanent knot. There are other areas of food, for example, sealed packages and unsealed packages and perforations and letters. So there are many other factors that we need to consider, and that we're not going to go at length now. But suffice it to say, Doctor, this is certainly, if we're gonna give a presentation on the opening and closing, the accessing food on Shabbos, this is certainly one of the citations that we would want to include, and we would have to bring it into the equation for a broader picture about how and when and if food may be.
Rabbi,
Yes.
to follow up on Bernie's point, so if a varoyer is looking to give a hechsher, so they would not just have to examine the plant, they would have to examine the packaging.
Interesting. So, Rebero, I'm not sure that is true or not true, but it is an interesting.
I'm going to ask my friend. It's an important question.
So what Rebero is saying is actually a very interesting point, because sometimes the hechsherim, I would say rabbis, but the boards that
The mashgiach.
well, no, the mashgichim are the ones who actually inspect, but the mashgichim are usually implementing policy that's dictated from a governing board of rabbis who create policy and consult with specific poskim. And many of the big hashkachas have single known poskim. So, for example, the Star K, I think it's Rav Heinemann in Baltimore, right? And you have in Toronto, there's certain hashkachas that have certain renowned poskim. The OU has a few important poskim. I think Rabelsky for a long time was the big posik. And so, generally speaking, and on, I don't mean to, there are many other hechsherim, each have very, very chashuv rabbonim, the Vada Kashrus of Bergen County.
Oh.
And so
the RCBs, and then you have the Kafke.
Right, the Chavke and the OK, and there are many, many wonderful hechsherim. But the point that Rebberos, and then you have the Vada Ir in Montreal, and so the mashgichim oversee, they implement, they inspect, but the rabbonim create policy. So Rebberos is asking an interesting question: should the rabbonim, and we're not going to answer this question, but I find it interesting, so I'm elaborating it. Should the rabbanim also insist or give imprint or give commentary or make their hashkacha conditional on a design that is Shabbos friendly? That's an interesting question. Because
in my opinion, kashrus is kashrus. So if you make a decision, you make it on kashrus.
So Dr. Stamler,
it's a totally separate Indian that is up to the person. Look, on a daily basis, there's no question.
Dr. Stamler says 6 out of 7 days a week, you can open your package regardless of the letters and how it's sealed or how it's perforated. So it's up to the consumer to be educated about how to open the packaging on Shabbos. And I'm inclined to agree with you. But Dr. Hammer is going to point out that if you've explored where hechsherim have waded into in recent times, today in the tri-state area, and particularly in Brooklyn, the hechsherim will also oversee the decor and the dress code and the music that's played. And so hechsherim sometimes do step past the simplest kashrut. And I'm not here to criticize nor to take a position, but it is interesting to note. Rebero?
There's one hechsher on wine where the signature of the rabbi, underneath it says Kozmansa Bagbuk Sagur, that he gives a hechsher, but as long as the bottle is closed, which is very interesting. Is somebody looking to be very careful?
Well, it may be that his issue has to do with, it's probably not mavushal. And so he's saying you can drink this bottle, but if someone serves it to you, and many restaurants that allow you to bring bottles that have a hechsher, they will not let you bring a non-mavushal wine into the restaurant. And I've had friends that were very disappointed. They were going for an important milestone, and they brought a very chashuv bottle,
Right,
and
which is yeah.
they had to drink it in the car.
When it comes to packaging, if you know some of the kosher brands of the ice cream bars, they're just all plain inside. Like your normal ice cream bars usually have writing all over it, but I think they did this so it would be easier to open on Shabbos.
Well, I mean, look, if you're a manufacturer, you should certainly try to make, and your primary target audience is a kosher consumer base. It would be
I
wise
forgot
to
which
make.
one of the mainstream brands from Brooklyn that was definitely the kosher brand. I was impressed. You open up and it was just plain white wrapper as opposed to
That's very
the other
smart.
brands are full of writing.
That is very smart. Very, very interesting. Give me 1 second. All right. You see, you never know, Rebel. You never know what discussion is going to come up in the course of a Gemara discussion. Now on to another food. Kedera shel basar. Actually, let's just look up one more thing. Sorry. Here, Rashi uses a word. Oh no, it's the next Gemara. I'm sorry. Here, all right, we'll close it and reopen it in a moment. Kedera shel basar. Okay, so you have a pot of food, of meat. And the Gemara says that you're allowed, if you tie it shut, and Rabbi Steinsaltz points out, you tie a garment over the cover of a pot. I don't know if it's a common occurrence. But if you're cooking a pot of meat, let's think about this. How long, if you're cooking in the kedera, we're not talking about some kind of curing, but if you're cooking in a pot, how long do you think your meat's going to last on the fire? Not 24 hours, right? Usually by 24 hours, it's already, anyway.
Unless it's chilled and it's on a very low heat.
But even
small
cholent
fire.
doesn't usually cook 24 hours. You put it up a few hours before Shabbos, or maybe right before Shabbos. And so you'll have it in the afternoon, but for 24 hours to pass is quite rare, unless you're cooking at like 150 degrees. Again, don't take cooking advice from me.
Unless you're in Gula and you have your chillent on Thursday night with
and then you have leftovers and you leave it.
Right.
That's true. So the Gemara says Pshita, obviously it's not a kesher, it's not a permanent knot. You're not going to keep it for more than. So the Gemara says, "Lo yitzricha." No, the answer is the is la shlacha. It has a shlacha. What is a shlacha? So here's where we're going to go to Rashi, and we're going to see Rashi gives us a French word, which I have no idea what that word is either. I don't know how to pronounce it. But Rebel, how do you pronounce that?
What are we looking on? Bertsun?
Yeah, you know, is this a word? Is that a word in modern French?
Not to my knowledge.
No. So anyways, it has a spout of sorts. Rabbi Steinsaltz says it's a string. So obviously I have a big machlokes about what this word means. And of course I lost the place of here. The Isla Shlacha. It has a something. Mahu the tema betulim mevatale. This something, either a string or a spout, allows us to possibly leave the knot tied in place. Kamash Malan, therefore we keep it shachidish. And although there is an alternate way to extract the food, and maybe you'll leave the knot, maybe you'll leave the knot on Shabbos, yeah, it may be made. Now we need to figure out, hold on, we need to figure out what's going on over here. Let me read Rabbi Steinsaltz, and we're going to see, because there's something fishy over here. The Mishnah says you can tie a garment to cover a pot of meat. The Gemara says it's obvious because it's for food. And the Gemara says maybe there's a string that you'll open a flap, take out the food, and leave the knot. Kamash Malan, that you're allowed to tie this, you're allowed to do this. What really are we talking about? Are we talking about that this knot is here to cook the food, which is what I insinuated, but I'm not sure how that's going to work on Shabbos. So maybe you're just doing it.
But Rabbi, I've seen padded things wrapped around the pot, you know, like
Atmana.
And with a string at the end.
But you're talking about to insulate the food?
Pot.
We're talking about an insulation?
Yeah, around the pot.
But you can't do that before Shabbos. So we're gonna have to assume that you don't actually do this to cook the food. Give me one more minute. Again, maybe I'm making something that's simple complicated, but I want to understand what's going on over here.
I thought I understood till you explained it.
Maybe it's just to keep the food warm.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's hatmana. You don't have to do hatmana on Shabbos. So maybe the question is about untying the knot, but no, we're talking about tying the knot. Unless the reason why you tie the knot is not to do with keeping the heat, but just to keep it from flies or bugs to protect the food.
Or
I guess
falling off.
I guess we'll have to say, today we put food in a refrigerator. Well, once upon a time they didn't have refrigerators. But you can keep your meat just as fresh and well if you just put a garment over it. Then no microorganisms can get into the food.
If it's a clean garment.
A clean garment, a very clean garment.
You don't wear that garment for Shabbos, not even after Shabbos.
No, yeah. Well, this past Shabbos and Shul, somebody came to me with a big problem. They had their shirt, and it was covered on one side with a big stain of cheesecake, because the first thing in Kiddush has cheesecake. So they wanted to know what to do. So I told them, make sure you spill your cholent on the other side. Hold on, one more second. So the Mishnah tells us that you're allowed to tie a knot on a pot of food. Okay, we're going to assume this is like a way to store the food. It can't be about heat, although my initial impression was that it had to do with keeping the heat in or whatever, but that's obviously not what we're talking about. We're talking about covering it. You don't want animals to access it. You don't want the kids to take all the food out. Anyways, okay, that's it. Now let's go on to the next segment of the Gemara. So I'm sorry for confusing y'all, but apparently there was a knot that was used in the storage of food or the preservation of food on Shabbos or over the overnight or whatever. And the Gemara asserts that even though there is a possibility that you could leave the knot tied and extract the food from another entrance, another opening, another zipper or Velcro, I don't know. But ultimately, you can tie the knot because we don't suppose that that's the likely scenario. Our Mishnah then continues, saying, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Omer, Koishra, what was the full citation? Koishra Chevel, let me look it up. Koishra Lifnei HaBehema, Bishvil Shaloi Teitze. You can tie, and it's not explicitly said, but the assumption is a rope across the entrance of an animal, not kennel, but an animal pen, to keep the animal inside. Pshita, it is obvious. Why is it obvious? Because animals, your animals, you need to care for them. You need to be able to let them in and out. And it's not a permanent knot. It's constantly being done and undone. Obviously, today you have those, you have ways to fasten a rope and take it off without any knot. If you want to inspect, you can come down to the Shul new property. You see these cute little, I don't know what you call them, these little thingies that you can close it with. But this is a knot that's constantly being done and undone. It's not a knot that's prohibited on Shabbos. It's not a kesher. It's not a permanent knot. Pshita should be obviously permitted. So why does the Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov need to teach us in a Mishnah that this is permissible? So the Gemara says, maybe there are two different ropes. Mahu the Tema, and we just turned on to page 113. Maybe you'll leave one rope tied. You'll open up the other rope. Kamash Malan, the answer is no. Typically, they're tied and they're untied, and therefore it is permissible on Shabbos. Rashi, what is the trei isuri? Shnei chavolim koisher b'roichev Pesach. You have a pen, and across the entrance you tie or you rope across two ropes. One on top of the other. 10-minute warning. Lishnachrina tre isuri shekoshim hayoim b'shnei tzidei Pesach. Either it's 2 ropes or it's 1 rope that's tied on 2 ends. I'm sorry, someone's saying something. I'm not hearing you.
In the back, in the building there, they're making an announcement.
Okay, no problem. And for those who have American connections, but you're in Canada, now you'll feel entirely at home.
Right.
So Rebero, that was for you. So Rashi gives 2 versions. I'm inclined to understand the first one better. 2 different ropes. You can plausibly take off 1 rope and let the animal kind of slip out. But typically they're both opened, and therefore, Kamash Malan, the Mishnah teaches us that one is permitted to tie these knots on Shabbos. All right.
Why would they do that if they knew about gates in those days?
They knew about gates, but not everyone used gates. Maybe it was expensive, or maybe you have to order your gate from India. And I don't know. So I guess some
Gates were easily made.
Maybe the ropes kept the gates open and closed.
or maybe the ropes had a similar function, and ropes are even cheaper and easier. I'm not sure, but but that's what it sounds like. All right, let's see that we have another 8 minutes or so. So we're going to get to the next mission. So I don't know why you don't have a gate. It's a question for the animal owner. But the fact of the matter is that some people might comfortably use 2 ropes. Drive out west, Davie, Cooper City, Southwest ranches. There's Canada are a lot of farms and animals and horses, and we'll see how they secure them. Sometimes there are gates, and sometimes there are other contraptions and mechanisms. I don't know if 2 ropes are going to keep a horse in, to be honest. But I guess every animal has its own nature and way that it is managed. Amar Rav Yosef, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. And now we're going to get a halachic opinion on our Mishnah. Our Mishnah taught that you're allowed to tie the two ropes, even though a person may leave one tied. Typically, they are temporary knots that are done and undone. So Rav Yosef, quoting Rav Yehuda, quoting Shmuel, teaches halacha k'Reb Elazar ben Yaakov. The halacha, the way of Jewish practice, the Jewish practice is that one may tie the 2 ropes, remove them, because that is a manner that is done, and it's not a permanent knot. Normally, Abaya says something. Hold on. Stop the presses. Halacha. If you have to comment and say, the halacha follows position X, what is the natural inference? Michlal the Pligi, it infers that there are other opinions in the Mishnah. And there are no other opinions in the Mishnah. And it doesn't appear that anybody's arguing with him. Rashi, Bitmiya, V'amai ifligu, Hadami lahanach d'le'el. The story of the rope of the pen is identical to all the other scenarios presented in our Mishnah. Why? How could you say that there's a machloikas? We had this kind of style. We had this type of dialogue once before. Amar lei. So I suppose Rav Yosef responds to Abaya, "Mai nafkelach mina." What do you care? The bottom line is we have the halacha. Does it matter if they're arguing or not? We have the bottom line. The bottom line is the bottom line. Amar lei. So Abaya responds, Gemara, Gemar, Zamartate. We're studying the Gemara, but it's not a game. It needs to be accurate, down to the last word. So if there's a machlokes, let us know there's a machlokes. If there is a consensus, express it as such. That's how. Let's see what Rabbi Steinsaltz translates. If you recall, last time we had this line, I was also a little bit uncertain. It's common enough, but he's basically saying if they're not arguing, then don't say the halacha follows them. We know that is the consensus.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Is there a Jewish connection to the concept of tying the knot, meaning getting married? I think there is.
Interesting. I don't know.
Okay. I think that when you get engaged, right? There's a ceremony. You do it right. We do it now right before the wedding ceremony, right?
Right.
Sign that and
Tanoim,
Tanoim, right? Okay.
or
So I
the
think
Vart, as it was called.
before Tanoim. Okay, but there's a.
Kenyan.
Let me finish, please, Bernie. So there's a ceremony there, okay? And I know that since I have relatives in Scotland, okay, and they have a ceremony of tying the knot upon engagements,
Interesting.
okay? And I don't think it's not necessarily from a Jewish background, but I think that it has to do with something ceremonial in terms of a commitment and before a wedding. In other words, actually an engagement. So I thought maybe it had something to do with Tanaim that it came.
Interesting.
Whatever.
So I'll tell you this: a knot is a good metaphor, and that's why it's used for the meeting or the union of two originally not attached parts. So two ropes tied together.
Right.
They become one, and so two individuals who once were living two separate lives, and now they mix their lives together in a very deep way, and in a Jewish law, a halachic, spiritual way. So certainly a knot is a good metaphor. I don't know. I'm not saying it doesn't. I don't know if in Judaism the metaphor of a knot is explicitly used in the Gemara to describe marriage, but we are talking about knots, and so we should say that the Zohar uses a metaphor of a knot to describe a deep connection and a deep conscious connection. For example, between Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and Hashem, on the day of his passing, and his students are all sad. He says, "Don't be sad, be joyous." And then one of the expressions he says is, "Bechad ketira is katarna." I am bound. I'm totally connected to Hashem. And so certainly the metaphor of tying a knot to describe the connection or a union of two entities, if you will, are used.
And so tying knots on tzitzis, on tefillin, on tefillin.
Oh, yes. So there are many knots. Knots are very Jewish, not just in our discussion here, which are practical knots, but indeed you have the knots of tzitzis, the knots of tefillin, and also another Kabbalistic teaching, teshuvah, is called tying a knot. Why? Because it's really, I think it goes to the Zohar, or Kabbalah describes that every mitzvah is like a rope that connects the Jew with or a person's neshama with his creator. And there are 613 different connections, which the metaphor uses a rope, and God forbid we do an Aveira. We cut the rope, we snip that attachment, that attachment no longer exists in the relationship between the Jew and his creator. And what is teshuvah? When a person does teshuvah and they repair the damage, they reestablish or they reconnect that rope, that channel of connection, and it's described that they've tied a knot. And the Balatanya says, if you think about it, a rope is strong, but a rope is strongest where there is a knot that fortifies the rope. And so the odds, if it's a good knot. And so if a rope is going to fray, it's not going to fray where the knot is, it's going to fray somewhere else. And that's the idea that when a person does teshuvah, they don't simply restore the connection, but they actually achieve a deeper connection. So that's a machshava idea about the knot.
So Bekitza, Rabbi, tshuva is a commitment that I will not do it again.
Yes. The Rambam describes the components of teshuvah, and the most essential part of teshuvah is a resolve to not repeat. And then there's vidoy, we have to confess and we have to feel bad about it, but the first step is to not do it again.
K-N-O-T.
Yeah. I almost missed the point.
Yeah, well, okay.
All right, let's close it because the clock's gonna ring. We're gonna get knocked off in a second. So he basically says no. Gemara is the martate. We don't just say things because it has to reflect. It has to be accurate. And he's basically challenging. He's challenging why we would say the halacha follows its opinion if everyone agrees. And so we're left with that. Rabbi Yosef says, and it seems like maybe there's a machlokes on the style of a mission. Rabbi Yosef says it could happen that we could have a tradition that says the halacha follows opinion X, even if there's no one disagreeing. But just to clarify, and I'll tell you why I think, because if you